one guy bet in the field and you called, and then the preflop raiser pulled like a ridiculous check raise, you can stuff it in his face with like a pair and a straight draw. The point being is that
so we're playing 1-3, 7-handed. I'm 1900, and the first villain covers me from the small blind, and the second villain has about 1,000 from middle position.
Okay.
So the hand starts with a $6 under the gun straddle. Villain 2 to my right limps in, which he's been doing fairly often. And then I have ace of clubs, 10 of clubs. So I raise it to 30 in the cutoff. And then villain 1 in the small blind, 3 bets to 120. It folds back around to villain 2, who cold calls, and then I call as well.
Okay.
And
all right, hold on. We're not in a rush. We're not in a big rush. A couple comments about preflop. Number one, where is this played at?
So this is in Portland.
Oh, okay. Like the poker guys, Portland?
Yeah.
Oh.
Portland Meadows. And so this game is probably as a 1-3 game. I mean, when you can buy in for 200 big blinds as opposed to a lot of 1-3 games where you're kind of capped to about, maybe 100 to 150 big blinds. So it kind of plays a bit deeper, which is why we're this deep.
So one thing of note here, so it's 1-3 with a $6 straddle, MP1 limps, hero in the cutoff. What did you raise it to? I know you said it, but I just
so I raised to 30.
Right, and then the small blind 3 bets to 120, and then the limper calls. He limp calls. Is that right?
Correct.
So this is a great spot to 4-bet. I mean, it might be a situation where you think that the 3 bets aren't all that light, but if you heard the previous call where I said his opponent was an idiot because there was really no reason to 4-bet, this guy basically has done what the previous call was, where he's basically limp called a 3-bet cold, which means that there's extra dead money out there. And, depending on how the game flow is, ace-10 suited, the small blind could certainly have a hand that he's going to fold. So I'm not saying I would always 4-bet here, but it's a pretty good time, sort of to do it.
So I had thought about that, but I just thought that my hand was, could play well enough post flop and being in position, and I just didn't want to get, I think, blown off my hand if I have 4-bet and then he 5 bets, 5 bets, whatever he 5 bets, I kind of, I'm obviously forced to fold at that point. So I thought just for his, for his 3-bet sizing, which was fairly standard, even with the limper in between, I just thought I would just, kind of take a flop and evaluate.
So the pot's probably going to be like 360 and change, 365, something like that. Is that right?
So it's 370 with the blinds, the straddle, and the 3 of us taking the flop off.
Okay.
So flop comes down 9 of clubs, 8 of clubs, 7 of spades.
9 of clubs, 8 of clubs, 7 of spades. So you have ace-10 of clubs, right? You defend the 3-bet with this limper in there. So you flop the nut flush draw in your open-ended, like a 15 out draw, right? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Correct. So, so kind of a really, the nutted combo draw, kind of situation and position. The villain 1 in the small blind checks. And I guess one question here is I kind of have been reading that there's a school of people who kind of think that, like, a 3-better out of position should be checking his entire range, whether the flop hits them or not. And,
in a multi-way pot? In a multi-way pot?
Right.
Or... I mean, multi-way,
Yeah,
there's a couple things going on, right? Like multi-way pots are obviously different. And, that school of thought, I would assume, unless it's a really stupid school of thought, is at least like making the assumption that people are playing somewhat close to normal ranges in a 3-bet pot. This guy limp called from MP1. He doesn't have a normal range. So if you put that into a play where once in a great while you're in a multi-way 3-bet pot somehow, where people have like 1% of hands, you could sort of see why somebody would be like, oh, any board could be a check 100 because I'm playing against such tight ranges. With that being said, I would still want to bet the boards that favor me like really well, like Ace King X, but maybe to keep it balanced. But I think that sort of goes out the window. What I thought you were going to say is that this specific board, maybe the guy checks, and I could definitely see that. Or even if it was a single raise pot and under the gun had opened early, and there were 2 field callers, and the board is this board, absolutely you can get on board with checking 100 on this board, but to check 100 on any board in a 3-bet pot would definitely have to demand that the players are playing somewhat reasonably pre-flop, and you've already set it up where that can't be if the guy just limp called the 3-bet.
Right. So, because I saw your episode with Rampage, where he's got kings on kind of a very similar board, and you're saying at low stakes games you're still okay to bet there a little bit. So I think it's kind of the same situation. So when he checks, I just kind of take it at face value for the moment and see what happens next. But it gets kind of, the odd, as I kind of said in my email, I mean, I think, this board obviously favors, MP1 and myself's range, versus, villain 1 in the small blinds 3-betting range. So villain 1 ends up leading out into the pot for 125.
Villain 1 is, I might have screwed up the
I'm sorry, villain 2. Villain 2,
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so villain 2 in middle position, like I said, he kind of leads out for 125. And I, as I said in my email, I think I kind of made a soft play mistake here by just flatting the 125 in position. And then, villain 1, ends up check raising to 450.
Okay, so hold on a second. Hold on. So MP1 bets 125. Now, here's your first decision point, right? You have a very sort of nuttish type of draw here. And it's interesting because your hand is sometimes so big. Sometimes I'll play this hand as a pull in a single raise pot with people, who are behind me. If the thing that could go your way here, if you actually considered raising, is that if the small blind is checking an overpair here, he can't call if you raise. I think it's really hard for him to continue on. So, and then like if MP1 is betting some bullshit like King 8 suited and he just folds, I mean, you've got a bolt. I mean, you're probably 65% against King 8. You know what I mean? With Ace 10 of clubs. Right. So, there's something to be said here if you think that the small blind would check over pairs for actually raising because you just drive them right out of the hand. With that being said, you've got a boatload of equity against overpairs here too. I'm not saying that calling is necessarily bad, but this is where we get to the fun part of the hand. So because I don't want to wash over this, you call right here on the so hero calls on button, right?
So I'm in the cutoff and I flat call,
excuse me. Right. So and then what happens?
And then villain 1 in the small blind check raises to 450.
Okay, so check raise to 450. Okay. And then does the other guy fold?
And villain 2 folds.
Okay. So this is the fun little spot that I was talking about that's happened a few times in my career. I don't know if it's ever happened in a 3-bet pot. It's actually almost even more egregious in a 3-bet pot. But there have been situations where guys who are out of position, and actually I guess you would think it probably would happen more often in a 3-bet pot, but thinking back to the few times this has happened, it was probably like Commerce, like mid 2000 teens. So maybe the situation where it got limped around and the guy in the blind raised like in a single raise pot. But whenever you have a guy who's done something aggressively pre-flop from out of position, and then he check raises a board that can't really hit him. In a sense, what I mean is that like, oh, he's trying to check raise an overpair, something like that. Like, yeah, he 3-bets out of the blind, or he straight raises after a bunch of limps and the board comes out 6, 7, 8 or some bullshit like that. And he doesn't have like 9, 10. He just has aces or kings, right? Right. If you're in a spot where you have called the bet post and then a guy from out of position who has the lead pre-flop does something stupid, you can just back raise him. And that's what I would do here all day long. I would back raise. So when you emailed me this hand, like I said, it doesn't really happen that often. But if you're ever in a situation where the pre-flop raiser has checked on an unfavorable board, somebody bets and you call with a big draw, and now all of a sudden the pre-flop raiser check raises, you can just stuff it right in his face. First of all, your hand's going to have this unbelievable amount of equity, like I said, against overpairs. I mean, even if the guy has Jack 10, your hand has a bunch of equity. Ace 10 of clubs against like a flopped Jack 10, you're probably at least 35%, maybe 40%. Set of nines, same bullshit, 40%. So it's just it's just a great spot to back raise. And I've back raised in this spot with less. And what I mean by back raising is that you back raise means when somebody calls, then someone raises. This is on the same street, and then that person that calls re-raises. It's almost kind of like a limp. I guess you could say a limp raise pre-flop is kind of like a back raise. That's a back raise. So
Right.
your hand has so much equity that I would back raise, shove on this guy all day long, and you can have some slow plays.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the questions I had tacked on at the end is where a lot of people I've talked to, I mean I think it's 80% plus are all like, oh, you're just shoving there, and I mean I think yeah, the very straightforward is I'm never folding, so it's calling or raising, and if I'm raising, it's raising how much.
Well, I mean, if he's made it 450 and you guys start with 1900, so you have what, 1550 left after the call plus, no, you have less than that. You probably have 1500, no, maybe 14 or 1500. Like the way I look at this is like I sort of calculate out what the call would be. So you made it 450, you called 900. There's already 125 in the pot plus what was out there. So it's like 1400 dead. I mean, it's like a pot size bet left, right? I mean, you would ship all in for like 1400, right?
Right. So here, I mean, is where I've had hands like this, not in this, where it's like you have a ton of outs, and it still doesn't mean that you're going to hit all of them. I mean, sure, your equity is high. I've had kind of very similar hands to this, much smaller pots, where kind of a combo draw like this versus a set I know is about 60-40. I looked up after this before our call-in that even against Jack 10, it's actually the same percentage as if he's got a set of nines.
Right.
So whether he's nutted or essentially set of nines is about the next best thing.
But what I'm saying is that even if he has like some hand that he's not supposed to do this with, like an overpair, like 20% of the time, and you get him to fold there, it's automatically profitable because your equity is so high. And he's going to show up, I think, with one of those hands. He's not supposed to be doing this 10 to 20%, maybe even more. What I find cool about this little spot, I mean, you have a monster hand, but if any of the viewers or listeners are ever in this spot, you can back raise. You don't even have to have a hand as big as this against a pre-flop raiser that's not supposed to be check raising. Like, say the board came out like Jack 7-8, and one guy bet in the field and you called, and then the pre-flop raiser pulled like a ridiculous check raise. You can stuff it in his face with like a pair and a straight draw. The point being is that most of the time, maybe if I had like, let's say he came out Jack 7-8 and some guy in the field bet, and I had Jack 10 suited, right? And I called, and then the pre-flop raiser check raised, where I just know he has an overpair, I certainly might just stuff back over the top Jack 10, knowing it's a semi-bluff. The point being is that this guy's sticking his nose out in a spot where it makes no sense for him to check and then check raise on a board like this. So what ended up happening? What did you do?
So I clicked it back to him to 1100, leaving myself just around 700. And kind of setting up, the pot's about 1,000 with his check raise. So when I click it back to 1,100, like I said, I'm leaving myself about 700. If he calls, the pot is, the pot is going to be about 2,700. So, I'm going to be getting, it's going to be, like I said, 2,700. If he puts me all in for my last 700, I'm getting, whatever, 4.5 to 1. There's no situation I'm ever folding at that point.
Yeah, so what you just described is when you're actually not supposed to do that. You're supposed to raise to an amount where it's possible that you could possibly fold to a re-raise. Otherwise, just move all in. I mean, I might make that play if I had the stone cold nuts and I just didn't want him to fold, but I would just ship it. But all right, so you click it back to, so you hero raise to 1100.
Right. So I raised back to 1100. And like I said, I did it just kind of calculating myself into just not being able to fold. I mean, I know when I make it 1100, I'm like, I don't want to put all 1700 straight in, right off the front.
Why not?
But I kind of, because I guess like I said, I've had enough experience with these situations where you've got every out in the world, but you still don't hit them. And not that I'm afraid of the stack depth and the money and everything. It's just like I just sometimes.
So are you saying that you're going to click it and then if he just calls, you're just going to take your equity? Basically, you're going to check back the turn.
So pretty much. That was my thinking, because I'm like, if I've gotten it all in and then the board pairs and you're.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, that would be. I mean, I'm not saying that I don't see this happen, but that would be a mistake on your opponent's. I mean, if you make it 1100 and I'm going with my hand, I'm never calling. I'm just moving in because I know like I'm not going to let you do that. But anyways, okay, so you make it 1100, yeah.
Right. So I make it 1100, and then he goes deep into the tank, and basically what ends up happening is he flips over 2 red queens and just kind of is trying to get a live read on me. But he's like even if I'm ahead now, he's like, I don't know if I'm ahead, and even if I'm not, he's like, I don't think I'm gonna, be ahead, by the end of this if you're willing to, play that through. So I guess it was, my call question was, is just jamming straight out, straight out the more optimal play, but obviously it's the higher variance play, right?
I mean, I don't know what you mean by optimal. You mean you think it's I think it's the best play? Yes, I think it's definitely the best play. Because again, unless he's totally like, it seems to me like you're trying to go smaller to see a free turn, which should never really happen. And again, I point out, I mean, I didn't know that he had 2 red queens. You never told me the result, but this is exactly what I was talking about. If anyone's ever in this situation where you call a field bet and you don't have the preflop lead, and then the preflop raiser does something that he can't do or he's not supposed to do, you can just back raise him back and he should fold. I would jam. Yeah, I mean, I would jam. So he folded?
So yeah, so he folded. I mean, I knew like, I'm a small favorite over any pair, and it's kind of a close-ish coin flip with aces. But everything else, I'm a small favorite over. As I said in the forwarding email, I'm like, range on range. I'm like, it's almost impossible for him to have, 9s, 8s, or 7s there. So the only hand that can really, I think, be the troublesome hand is if he is 3-betting Jack 10 there. And I think everything else, it's just, I'm like I said, I'm a small favorite over, but I guess I'm just not, like
Sam,
just
jamming
all in there.
Just jam it. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it.